Russell Brand, Narcissist, Part 9. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We are continuing our examination of the evidence to make a determination as to what Russell Brand is. There is a lot of evidence in relation to him, as he puts a lot of himself out there. Is that just the blatant honesty of a non-narcissist, or is it the showmanship of a narcissist who simply doesn't operate with a facade and doesn't care what people necessarily think about him as long as they think about him? In order to learn more about this man, we're going to go back to 2019 and to go through an interview that took place with The Times, the very newspaper which has been instrumental in investigating him over the last 4 years. Might it be that the content of this interview precipitated certain thoughts amongst the journalists at The Times that caused them to then decide that they would investigate him further? Well, you can make your own mind up about that, but we're going to go through the content of the interview as it throws up various interesting points for consideration in making a determination about what Russell Brand is. The curious thing about fame is that everyone who has it says it's not all it's cracked up to be, and yet people who crave it refuse to believe them. A celebrity can persuade them of almost anything else: what to buy, what to eat, what to wear. When it comes to the Pyrrhic victory of stardom, however, they will not listen. There can be few people alive who have craved fame more than Russell Brand once did, or gone to greater lengths to realise the ambition. Might that be as a consequence of the fact that fame would cater to the prime aims, and therefore he was driven to seek it out? He burst into the limelight on MTV in 2000, all teeth and Essex cheekbones, only to be sacked a year later for showing up to work the day after 9/11 dressed as Osama bin Laden. Potential absence of emotional empathy. His frenetic eloquence catapulted him onto E4 as the host of Big Brother's Big Mouth, dressed as a Regency Gothic disco dandy and a string of sold-out stand-up tours, while his kamikaze impulse to offend kept amplifying his notoriety. Impulsive behaviour. Does this show poor regulation and possibly a psychopathic trait? The fact that he insults shows an absence of emotional empathy, or was this just part of an act that he knew was useful for getting attention? His best-selling 2007 autobiography caused a sensation, gleefully recounting his addictions to crack, heroin, alcohol, prostitutes and sexual debauchery, all of which shows an absence of accountability and responsibility. He scandalized America by calling then-President George W. Bush a retarded cowboy fella, while hosting the Video Music Awards, and lost his job at the BBC Radio 2 for making prank calls on air to Andrew Sachs. But Hollywood made him a movie star, with roles in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek and Arthur, and a celebrity wedding to pop princess Katy Perry in 2010 finally gave him the global household name status he'd so desired. The divorce within 2 years only made him more famous, and in 2015 he caused a stir in the general election by urging the electorate to abstain from voting. And then he more or less vanished. In 2017 there was a book about addiction. He's been a zealous 12-step missionary since getting clean in 2002, and last year a stand-up tour, and he continues to release podcasts and his YouTube videos, The Truths. But by the standards of Brand's blazing filament, the lights had gone out. Now, this retreat from fame is interesting, because this might suggest behaviour that wouldn't necessarily be associated with a narcissist. Or is it the case that having got to the position that he has, his narcissism says, we can relax now. We have the residual benefit of money. We can control people when they meet them because of the fame that we have now accrued. We don't need to get any more of that. We have an extensive fuel matrix as it is. We don't necessarily have to keep going out on tours. Might it be that the nature of his narcissism has shifted not to a position of contentment, but an alternative way of being? When we meet in a private members club in West London, the contrast with our last encounter 5 years ago is instantly apparent. At 43, His physical appearance hasn't altered much. The beard is longer, more biblical than hipster, and today's pantomime rock star outfit, black jeans, boots, skull and crossbones neck scarf, a little less outre than of old. But although his eyes are still burning pools of black, the manic intensity has gone. He is conspicuously still and speaks slowly, picking his words with care, displaying little of the old linguistic gymnastics. Now, this alteration, is this because his behaviour previously was because he was acting under the influence of addiction? And now, having dealt with those addictions, a calmer side is shown? Or is this simply the chameleon-like behaviour of a narcissist who has now adopted a different view that he will offer to the world? That he put it all out there, and now he's retreated from doing so, and instead, having been the hedonistic vaudevillian pantomime rock star, has instead decided to opt for a more holistic wellness presentation. But presentation it still is. It's just of a difficult kind. The journalist states that they had the impression it would take little to provoke him, and for all his talk of spiritual enlightenment, I was unconvinced by his claim not to live my life through others' perspective on me. My experience of being alive ain't contingent, thank God, on what people think of me. That, of course, is not the way that a narcissist would function, but of course an unaware narcissist may make such an observation. I don't know which of my addictions cause the most damage to other people, he offers thoughtfully. It's difficult to quantify, but I tell you what is still hard, and perhaps because it's still very new, but letting go of what other people think of you, just to think you exist independently of other people's thoughts, that's difficult, especially with fame and all that, and people caring about you and writing about you. When you're famous, you're living in someone else's mind and perception. Brand knew right from the start of his career that fame and adulation weren't healthy. No, it didn't feel right. But interestingly, he still went ahead and did it, didn't he? Is that hypocrisy? He can still recall starting work at MTV and finding an audience of people gathered around a television watching his audition tape. I heard them laughing, and then I saw that they were watching me. And I remember the feeling, something good's going to happen. Is this the receipt of fuel, perhaps? But even back then, I remember thinking it's weird, like I'm hosting these big events and stuff, and what am I going to tell people when they ask me what it was like? The only thing I'm going to be able to honestly report is that I was nervous and felt sick and I didn't really like it. Now, is that a revision of history? Because if he was nervous and felt sick, he certainly didn't show it. Indeed, he seemed very much to be lapping it all up. Could he recognise the wrongness of the sensation? No, because I'd never felt right. I didn't have a good understanding of what peace of mind and serenity were. He couldn't even fully acknowledge to himself how unhappy his success was making him. I was just surprised that it didn't feel better to be that famous, but fame seemed so important, and everyone else was telling me it was important, and so I think perhaps that for me, that was something I only recognised retrospectively, because it's very seductive. Is this a changed individual, or is this just the narcissist offering a different front? Even now, he can look at photographs of himself at an A-list occasion and remember the reality of that photograph. It wasn't what it looked like. It wasn't any good in the photograph, and yet I can still want to be back in the photograph. Had his movie Arthur made $100 million at the box office, he thinks he might well still be living that life. So I suppose certain things not going the way I would have them go has actually been quite opportune. Because the more my attention gravitates to the things that are quite ordinary and real and away from all of that, the happier and more content and serene I am. In 2017, Brand married Laura Gallagher, a lifestyle blogger and younger sister of the Sky Sports presenter Kirsty, in an altogether more low-key ceremony than the celebrity extravaganza of his first wedding in India, which featured bejewelled elephants. The couple have 2 daughters, Mabel 2 and Peggy 6 months, and live in a Beatrix Potter buck in a pretty village in rural Oxfordshire with dogs and chickens, though the Arga had to go. He's taken up baking and takes fastidious care to filter what he reads or watches on TV, Because if I start paying too much attention to celebrity-type ephemera, then I start thinking, yes, I should be doing that. So I nurture the voice that says, don't you remember, that stuff is meaningless. It won't ever fulfill me. Now, I'm providing you with this interview because it provides a complete contrast with the Russell Brand that has been portrayed previously, and provides us with an opportunity to consider this. Is this a man that was plagued by addiction and other issues, which I'll be coming to in later parts, namely the issue of bipolar disorder? Is this an individual that's been plagued by those difficulties and has made a conscious effort to turn his life around? Or is this simply another presentation whereby the chameleon-like narcissist has moved from a particular type of character to another, that he is attempting to portray himself as content and serene, a more sort of guru-style character, rather than the hedonistic, drink and drug-fueled, running around full of energy individual that was fucking everything that moved? Is it just a different manifestation? Is it just a different way of gaining the control that he requires? Is it just a different way of gaining fuel? You, of course, can make your mind up about all of this to see, is it meaningful and genuine change, or is it simply a further presentation, a further front that's being provided? The journalist asks him to describe his daily life. I get up, I meditate and I pray, I go and see Mabel and Peggy, I go for a run with the dog around fields nearby, I do some writing, some recovery-related stuff, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu quite a lot, I go to the gym. It's sort of like a luxury penitentiary, a really, really open prison, sort of E or F category prison, quite nice accommodation, little bit of solitary, meal times, quite calm, I suppose. Before I prioritised excitement and glamour and pleasure. Now I prioritise serenity, calmness, usefulness, and it's definitely a better system. He shoots a mischievously rueful grin. I probably could have learnt it earlier. Does that show that there was an active choice to continue to behave the way that he did? He and Gallagher had dated each other more than a decade ago, when he was at the height of his womanizing rampage. So I imagine she must have had some doubts about the durability of this new version of him. She definitely had misgivings, but I feel like our relationship and the trust in it, she understands how seriously I take it. The urge to take drugs never ever troubles him. He was relieved of that compulsion within a couple of years of sobriety. Sex addiction, however, like compulsive eating, was a tougher one to crack. Total abstinence not being a viable option. But nothing good could come from harming her. If I put something in the space between me and her, it would be very detrimental to me. So when I think, oh, that person is attractive, the next thought is, yes, but if you ever did anything, you realise that would destroy your whole life. There's that voice in my head now. This is a very telling observation, because it doesn't show any emotional empathy for his wife. It's about him. Namely, that person's attractive, i.e., I'd like to fuck them. Hang on a second. If I do that, it'll destroy my life. Not that would upset my wife and children, but it would destroy my life. And therefore, that is an interesting observation that's been provided there, that perhaps supports that his selfishness maintains. It's just being dealt with in a different way. When the couple began dating again, the gravity of Brand's resolve must have become clear to Gallagher on their second date. Instead of taking her out to dinner, he took her to a counselling session with his relationship therapist. Whose idea was that? Mine, because I really believe in that stuff. I don't want to be a bad person, but I know I have potential. So I like to set up relationships and systems that help me stay on track. Gallagher continues to see the counsellor regularly alone, and whenever their relationship hits trouble, they take the problem to her together immediately. Now, it's interesting again that there's reference to the relationship hitting trouble, which is what you would expect would happen with a narcissist. It may well be the case that Brand has become less obvious in his behaviours, and instead more of them take place behind closed doors. And he asserts control by triangulating his wife, potentially, with a therapist. That there are problems that occur, perhaps driven by his narcissism. Or, if not, what is causing the problems? He states that he's dealt with his addictions, that he's obtained help. Therefore, if he's dealt with those matters, what is it that's causing the problem? Perhaps it might be occasionally the addiction manifests once again. Or is it quite simply that it is a narcissism that keeps doing this and creates some kind of problem within the relationship, and that he's shifted the behaviours so that they're not as overt as they once were, but nevertheless still become problematic for his wife, necessitating the requirement to go to a counsellor? I think probably anybody could be a mentor, because it's nurturing and loving relationship when you can't get anything material or explicit from the recipient of your mentoring. It's non-transactional and very beautiful. This all sounds extremely sensible. When we met 5 years ago, I found his new agey talk of spiritual enlightenment hard to square with his dangerously restless, almost menacingly mischievous energy. But today it feels altogether more congruent. There's no flirting or teasing, no larking about, and the solemnity of his humility when he talks about mentorship feels sincere. But it's hard not to read the book as Brand's quest for surrogate parents. His father was a largely absent and unreliable figure in Brand's childhood, as I've explained previously, likely to be a narcissist and creating a lack of control environment. His mother was repeatedly ill with cancer, and he loathed his stepdad. So I wonder what he thinks they will make of the book. What will his father feel? I don't know. I think he might like it. Might he not read it as an indictment of his paternal shortcomings? Brand looks uncharacteristically vulnerable, and reminds me that he took care to thank his parents in the acknowledgements for being his first mentors. Just in case, because I thought if my children wrote a book and I managed to get right the way through it without it mentioning what a great guy I am, I might be irked. Telling again. Notice how he brings it back to talking about him within the context of his children writing a book to thank him. Does he honestly consider his father a good mentor? He hesitates. Yes, in lots of ways. People love him, you know. He's an intensely charismatic working-class bloke from Dagenham who's funny and sharp. He's a joy, and I'm really proud of him. Now, that's an interesting observation because, and I'm going to show you this in a later part, there is a video where he boxes his father. And in that video, he talks about how he wanted to fight his father because he hates him as a consequence of the fact that he left him. And Brand becomes rather emotional, showing his anger, possibly fury, for his father, which sits completely at odds of saying that he's funny and sharp, he's a joy, and I'm really proud of him. The journalist asks, how does he reconcile this affectionate pride with the memory of his father hiring 2 prostitutes for him and 1 for his son when Brand was just 16? I feel that that reconciliation can only happen with compassion for the childhood he had. My dad lost his dad when he was a 7-year-old boy, and actually, as I've grown more mature and identified less with my adolescent self, I've begun to see that my dad just needs love, and he's doing his best, and I don't feel judgmental to him, and it's a relief. You know, obviously visiting a brothel is not a cool thing to do with a very young person, but I also understand it. What comes next takes me by surprise, writes the journalist. In a way, he reflects, forgiving the mother is harder. Brand has always talked about adoring his mum, who raised her only child as a single parent. So I ask him to explain. I suppose I must feel more enmeshed or closer with the mother, so it's harder to have perspective. I wonder if there's more to the explanation than that. Brand's relationship with women is notoriously complicated, for he has always maintained that his insatiable womanizing had nothing to do with misogynistic objectification or even lust, but rather a romantic idealization of womanhood, in which he fruitlessly sought spiritual salvation. Smacks of idealization and magical thinking. He was always, he writes, looking for goddesses, and of one former girlfriend writes, I'd cast her in the role of a deity when she had the limitations of a human. That sounds like idealization. Did the inevitable disappointment lead to anger? Yes, I think that's probably what's unhelpful about that erroneous belief. Brand has always maintained that his conquests were willing partners, but I'm curious to know whether the #MeToo movement has made him reappraise his past behaviour through a new lens. He shakes his head. No, I just feel that #MeToo is a really positive change. It's a sign of real awakening. There's nothing he now looks back on with regret? No. He says the lesson he learnt about women from his divorce from Perry was that No one was put on this earth to make me feel better. That's no one's job. But I'm perturbed by the chapter in Mentors about fatherhood, where it sounds rather as if he's transferred his idealised fantasies of feminine perfection onto his daughters. He's neurotic about anyone touching them. Is this overprotectiveness, a manifestation of the need for control? And horrified by playdates. There is nothing playful about a playdate. It's an unrestrained, unmanaged, dangerous experiment that places my precious, perfect little girl in the company of anonymous, unvetted potential arseholes. A rather judgmental and overprotective view. Has he considered the possibility that he's projecting all his old, unrealistic expectations of perfection onto his daughters? A fleeting tension in his expression suggests he is not. I think the old brand might have flown off the handle, but after considering it calmly, he concedes, "You might be right, maybe, but I feel like the perfection doesn't seem particular to their femininity." Brand dedicates the book to his daughters, whose impact on him has almost certainly been greater than the combined influence of all the mentors it features. While touring last year, I'd have to come home, and the sort of things I'd have to do would be like, "Oh, you've got to clear up some dog shit from over there, or this baby needs to be held." And I'm aware that this is better than the more decadent and hedonistic things I used to do. This is actually working. It's grounding me. It's the perfect antidote to the thing of, "Oh God, I'm magnificent, aren't I important? Look at these things you've just said to people. You must be great." All of this is like, "Oh yes, right, that was meaningless, right, I better clean up this shit. Oh, it's gone down the groove in the floorboards." That stuff makes me remember the truth. By now I'm picturing him at home in bucolic bliss, a child in each arm, the very vision of a modern hands-on father. So when I ask him what length of time he's ever looked after his two children by himself, the answer is rather a shock. That's a good question, isn't it? Well, okay, the two of them, well, not long. Not long? How long? I've done like a night, but they're asleep then. Has he ever spent 24 hours in sole charge of his children? He looks at me as if I must be mad. No, she wouldn't go away for 24 hours, Laura. She respects and cares for their safety too much. Now, that's interesting that he hasn't got that level of involvement with his children. Is that because at the heart of it all, he doesn't care, and the image of being with his children is more important than the actual being with his children? Or is it the simple case that his wife handles those matters so he doesn't have to? He goes on to state, "Yes, I'm very, very focused on the mystical connotations of Mabel's beauty and grace, not so good on the nappies and making sure that they eat food." This again smacks of grandiosity, talking about the beauty and grace of a child rather than getting on with the fundamentals. When I looked after Mabel on her own, she dropped 2 social classes in an hour. In no time at all, we're in a coffee shop. She's just got a nappy on. She's covered in stuff because I'm not willing to fight any of the battles. I'm like, fuck it. It doesn't matter whether she wears trousers. No, I suppose it doesn't matter if she does that. So it looks a bit shameless within a couple of hours. Laura's able to sustain and maintain domesticity in a way that's astonishing. I didn't have much experience of how to organise domesticity. I do whatever I'm told. Seeing my expression, he adds, "I feel like I'm doing a fucking probation interview." These observations tend to suggest that it's more about the image that he's trying to project to the outside world of domestic bliss rather than actually truly participating in it. The interviewer asks, why doesn't he do more of the practical parenting? I'm still of a romantic and reflective and possibly, to give its proper name, a religious disposition. That's my world view. That's not necessarily what you want, organising pragmatic, bureaucratic, managerial stuff. Like remembering to pack the nappy bags and carrot sticks. Oh, totally. Laura does all of it. It turns out that she's extremely well versed in the nuances and complexities of child rearing. Me, I am dedicated to it, devoted to it, but I'm still surprised when it's like, oh my God, this is fucking really hard and it's so exhausting. The younger one, I just feel so inept so quickly, like with the crying. He breaks off looking worried. I would hate for you to leave with the impression that I'm sort of sat watching television, peering over the armchair of what's going on. I'm not. Yesterday, like, I drove Mabel to the play school and I dropped her at the play school. But I'm sensitive and awake and aware, so I have to dial a lot of shit down to go through normal life. Again, notice that it has to be talking about how it is all for him, rather than thinking about what it might be like for his daughters. The journalist writes, Brand's battle with his ego is clearly not quite won yet. I find it quite hard to divorce my own former and somewhat present need for attention and admiration from my genuine good intentions, he admits. I wonder what he would have made of this book had he read it 20 years ago. Could it have diverted him from his narcissistic quest for fame? I think I would have liked it. I think it would have worked, because there is truth in it, and I feel that I would recognise the truth. I feel I could have reached me as a kid. He pauses and grins. Well, I like to think that, but perhaps that's some remnant of my narcissism. An interesting final remark there from Russell Brand, whereby he references his own narcissism. Is this awareness, or is it an unaware narcissist, simply putting that forward as a means of provoking? Or is it that he is narcissistic, recognises that, but isn't a narcissist? A fascinating interview, because it completely contrasts, in the main, with how he was before. Is it the case that he's effected genuine change, which would then say that he can't be a narcissist? Or is this just a different front that is being put forward, and all he's simply done is shift the way that he behaves in terms of how it appears, but the central aspects of it, his selfishness, his sense of entitlement, his lack of accountability, the absence of emotional empathy, his grandiosity, etc., remain. You, no doubt, will have your thoughts based upon what you've heard, and I'd welcome you sharing them in the comments section. In the next section, we'll be moving on to further recollections about other aspects of his behaviour. Join me there in part 10.